But I do want to talk about what is going on right now in Gaza. Right now, there was aid being given out by American military contractors that led to firing of shots in the direction of the crowd at one of the aid distribution centers. And there was the breaking down of a gate barrier and people flooding in as starving Palestinian civilians try to get aid that is completely insufficient. Where I think from the Israeli government's perspective is they're doing the bare minimum that they can do in order to say, look, optics, there was aid that went in, while not dealing with the crisis of starvation in the strip. That is the perception that I've gotten. That's the perception that most NGOs that are working there that have gotten. I think that's pretty clear. Now, that's not to say that that situation might change in the future, but that doesn't seem to be an arena where the Trump administration is pressuring the Israelis quite sufficiently. The Trump administration right now is breaking with the Israelis on Syria. They're breaking with the Israelis at least slightly on Iran. But when it comes to the humanitarian concerns in Gaza, I think that the pressure has been slight. The pressure has been slight. And so we're going to talk about where the presidency has been breaking with the Israelis more on other geopolitical issues. But when it comes to the situation in Gaza, the bombing is killing dozens and dozens of people every day. Some of them Hamas militants, some of them not Hamas militants. Children, women, civilians in their home. I knew that I saw one pediatrician lost 9 out of their 10 children in the bombing. 9 out of their 10 children. And as the Palestinian civilians have less and less infrastructure to live in, more and more of them are living in tents, in the rubble of buildings. And while people might be able to get some aid in the south of Gaza, no, if you're in the north of Gaza, being able to get aid is basically next to impossible right now. I mean, even getting into the south is extremely difficult because it's just not enough aid to go around. And as we could see, the private military contractors haven't done a great job of distributing the aid. But in the north, it's basically next to impossible to get aid. So the bombing right now is extremely brutal with a lot of civilian casualties. It doesn't seem that a particularly lot of work is being done to guard from large amounts of civilian casualties. And when you combine that with Hamas's track record with fighting near civilians and storing their weapons in things like UN schools and such, it leads to a disastrous outcome for the civilians on the ground. And then when you combine that with a Israeli government that is flirting more and more with the idea, open idea, not just privately in meetings as it was done before, as Ben Gvir and a lot of the other Israeli right were pushing this internally, we're now seeing a lot more of it being coming out to the public, the floating like openly of what the future of Gaza will be, whether or not they would expel all the Palestinian civilians. And it seems like the Israeli government, from all reports, would be particularly pleased if all the Palestinians at the end of this war just up and left, whether the Israelis would give them a lump sum of $1,000 while they're in an extremely desperate situation to leave the strip, whether if that did not work, they would just force them out. Whether or not they don't go through with it at the end of the day is impossible to say now. But the fact that it is being openly considered that the Palestinians might not have a future in their own homes is a humanitarian catastrophe and a human rights disaster. A human rights disaster. Despite whatever action Hamas has taken, that does not take away the right for civilians to live in their own homes, to have the ability to return, and to be able to dictate their own future. Hamas might not have a right to do these types of attacks and continue to perpetuate its own existence if it's going to do these types of brutal and horrific terror attacks, but the Palestinian people have a right to perpetuate their existence in their own homes. and the existence of their culture, the existence of their traditions, and the existence of eventually a political entity that represents them. Some might call it a country. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be a short process, it's going to be an easy process, or if I'm even saying that's a particularly likely process right now. But at the end of the day, the Palestinian people have to have a home. And I think that giving them a state, considering how much ill will there are between these two populations, is the easiest method, unless the Israelis think that they can build a pluralistic society with all of these Palestinians that they're moving into with guns and bombs who don't want anything to do with your country. Where would this lead to a period of peace, or would this lead to a period, oh, because we're going to be a secular state? Or will there be people who want to maintain the Jewish character of the Israeli state, and having all of these Palestinians added to Israel is going to scare them, and that's going to ramp up tensions, and all of these people who have lost everything being brought to the state is going to ramp up. It seems like a disaster waiting to happen. And so I'm not an expert on the region that's going to tell you the perfect solution. But whatever that solution is, it should be a solution where the Palestinians are treated with dignity, that they have a future, and where the worst elements won't be able to make the most convincing arguments that the only method towards their future is violent armed struggle. This violent armed struggle, definitely any violent armed struggle that includes the targeting of civilians. And I think that the strategy that Netanyahu government is taking is a strategy for conquest, not a strategy for building peace between two peoples. And I think that's ultimately, when it comes to the polling, what the majority of the Israeli people want right now. That's not to say that they want a future Palestinian state, but they want the war to end. They want the war to end. But there's also some other data right now that is quite concerning to me that I do want to point to before we talk about Trump's feud with Netanyahu. And that is some data from Haaretz indicating that 82% of Jewish Israelis would back an expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. Meaning the people who live there, in their homes, in their communities, in their towns, in their either tiny village outside of Gaza or in Gaza itself, all of them pushed out, gone, presumably replaced by Jewish settlers, who would then take their homes of all these people who would go where? Well, that's of no concern to the Israelis. That's not the, I mean, ultimately it's the Palestinians. If they go to Egypt, they go to Egypt. If they go to Saudi Arabia, they go to Saudi Arabia. If they go to Turkey and get lynched, then they go to Turkey and they get lynched. Wherever they go is wherever they go. There'll be a state. They'll be pushed to the worst position a stateless people can be pushed to. That right there is not only illegal under international law, but I think meets the barrier of ethnic cleansing pretty clearly. And it's not like, oh, well, you know, all of them need to go so we can replace them with settlers. To think that a slight majority of Israelis, because it's not just Jewish Israelis that make up Israelis, there's other Israelis as well, but that probably a majority, at least according to this one poll, and hey, we should not base the entirety of our judgment of Israeli society based on one poll. I think more polling should be done to double check this, because this would have pretty big implications for the future of the peace process to see the Israeli public be radicalized this far to the right. I mean, it's pretty clear they've been radicalized to the right through this process of fighting, but this is extreme radicalization. And let me just say, this isn't even necessarily the most concerning statistic in this data. There's another piece of data in here that said 47% of Jewish Israelis would back a type of violence where when they take a city, they destroy everything and kill everything. I wonder if I can actually find the exact quote, because it was actually asked in like a biblical manner, which I found pretty interesting. Here it is. Religious interpretations play a key role in shaping these views. Nearly half, 47% of Jewish Israelis agreed, and responded to this poll, of course. It's not like they asked every single Jewish Israeli, but it's supposed to be proportional. Agreed that when conquering an enemy city, The Israel Defense Forces should act as the Israelites did in Jericho under Joshua's command, killing all of its inhabitants. 65% said they believed in the existence of a modern day incarnation of Amalek, the Israelite biblical enemy, who God commanded to wipe out in Deuteronomy 25:19. Among those believers, 93% said the commandment to erase Amalek's memory remains relevant today. Now, look, if you ask somebody something like, do you believe that the Bible story is relevant or your religious story is relevant, they're going to answer that in high numbers. But that first question, should when the IDF conquers a city kill all its inhabitants, putting the religious mumbo jumbo in the middle probably helped some people move forward. If you just took out the religious mumbo jumbo, and I'm sorry to call it that, but you took out the religious mumbo jumbo in the middle, I wonder if that number would go down any bit. If it was just, do you believe when the IDF enters a city, it should just kill everything? Do you think it would go down to like 20% or 25%, 30%? Would that affect the polling? I'm interested. I'm interested if that would affect the polling. And I think that maybe there should be a poll done where the questions are asked slightly differently. But even with the religious mumbo jumbo, hello. Now I'm back. I was muted for some reason.
Burns is an immoral.
Is this where like I enter a Mossad joke? Trashamancer, thank you so much for the tier 1. I appreciate it. Either way, these are wild beliefs. Now look, if you go to wartime post 9/11 United States and you poll the American public of like what percentage of Americans want to glass the Middle East, you'll get some repulsive views. I would recommend, to give you an idea of what maybe not a majority of Americans, but certainly a strong percentage of Americans believed post 9/11, I would recommend watching the Howard Stern Show broadcast live as 9/11 was happening. Again, we're talking now 600 days into a war. So comparing that to the day of 9/11 is not exactly 100% comparable. But I just want to get across the idea that, post these types of terror attacks where such brutality is shown to a civilian population, sympathy tends to go away. But this type of polling can affect policy now, that when either people's conscience starts to affect them more, or if it doesn't, either way, these decisions could be made now because of this war bloodthirsty fervor, to be completely blunt with you, that could have implications for the rest of Israel and the Palestinian people's history. And so when decisions like the expulsion of these people from their land to push them into a trail of tears, if that's your objective, then it has to be stopped. It has to be stopped. The United States can have no complicity in that. We'll look awful. And I mean, not only will we look awful, not only will it be first and foremost humanitarian catastrophe, but this will also counteract a lot of Trump's initiatives. You think it's going to be easy for the Saudis and the United States to be in the same room if the Palestinians are actively getting expelled from the Gaza Strip? You think that's normalization between Israel and Saudi? I mean, even if Trump's willing to, not make that a number one priority when negotiating with the powers of the region, I do think there is a point to where the public could be pushed to make it so that it would be a political liability to not make Trump do more. And let me tell you, the Gulf states have been pretty good at getting Trump to do more. Not particularly more when it comes to fighting for the Palestinians particularly. But I mean, I guess you got the tiny aid mission with the American mercenaries, but more in broad strokes. And so I think that it would be counteractive or counterproductive towards his goals. And so from an American perspective, I think there has to be a question of Trump, for his own goals and for what probably should have been done, not probably, which should have been done a long time ago, being put forward a question of, look, there has to be a change of behavior. There has to be a clear stating of objectives and end goals towards seeing like how this conflict could end. That doesn't include the bloodthirsty conquest of the Gaza Strip, and the United States looking like they're backing a genocide. And whether you can make whatever legal argument you want in front of the Hague or in front of the International Court, that is the international perception of the United States amongst much of the world. When it comes to this war, that is how we are viewed. And while many nations are sympathetic to what happened on October 7th, when you have the German chancellor talking about, none of this justifies what's happening right now, and that's the German chancellor, the world has released its verdict, and this is not benefiting the United States to continue this. And so the question is, how much control do people like Sheldon Adelson and those who believe that you need to stick with Israel through and through to the end of whatever goal is, how much influence do they really have over Trump? How much does Trump really want to be beloved by the Israeli people? And does Trump believe that he can buck Netanyahu and still keep that support, since the majority of Israelis want to see an end to the war too? And continuing the war like this is probably not going to see the last hostages released. Either way, this status quo cannot hold forever. And the Palestinians deserve to, and all the civilians affected by this war, frankly, but especially those who are getting kind of corralled and bombed, deserve to know something other than death. Hamas should give up the hostages, and immediately the Trump administration should take action to pressure Israel more directly. And the reason I'm talking about this like it's not an impossibility, and it's because I got to grasp onto some hope, because hope in the human spirit is unconquerable, is because Trump has been willing to show some breaking with Israel, whether because he believes that he has the flexibility that someone like Reagan believed he had when he went to the Israelis and said they got to stop holocausting the Lebanese because it looks like the Holocaust from how horrible the bombing is in southern Lebanon, whether he feels like he has that flexibility. When the Israelis said that they didn't want him to remove the sanctions on Syria, he announced it anyway. And now they're writing waivers before they've even gone through with the legislation of removing the Caesar sanctions. When they said, like, they want to do this and do that to the Iranians, the Trump administration has prioritized negotiations. Now, maybe those negotiations will fall through. Trump is very hard on the Iranians. It's not impossible for me to see him saying, okay, well, I guess we haven't gotten a real sufficient deal. I'm actually going to do a strike. But I think the Israelis wanted to do it now already. I think Netanyahu wants to use the violence of the moment, the chaos of the moment, to strike. And the sanctions lifting on Syria also counteracts, I think, one Israeli objective, which was expanding their holdings in southern Syria to get the most powerful defensive positions, but possibly, due to recent rhetoric that I've seen from the Israeli government, move into Druze communities in southern Syria. And I think if Trump's talking about, normalization of relations and sanctions relief and removing them all, and now he's moving towards that, more military action of that type in Syria might be frowned upon in Washington. So it seems like he's willing to break with them in key areas, but Gaza and the West Bank is different. It's different from the way that Trump has talked. And when it comes to humanitarian level, I don't think he cares. He's the guy who says you need to take out the families of terrorists. So I think that is probably where we're going to see him aligned. But I think he knows that the violence is bad for him. I think he knows that the continuation of the violence, when he said he was going to bring all this, violent stuff to an end, is bad for him. And I think he can see that it's not positive towards America's interests in the region. I know, I'm not trying to claim that Trump is some genius here. I just think it's so obvious that it would be impossible to miss. Impossible to miss. And I think that him breaking with Israel in key areas shows that he's not just going to follow them lockstep and key. I think in most instances he will, due to his donor base, due to who supports him, due to the strong support of evangelicals coming out stronger for him than they did for George Bush. But I do think there's a possibility of breaking because he's shown some record of it. And I think a full expulsion of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, I don't know if that's the limit, because so far we've seen Trump put policy out for the future of the Strip that is some variety from Hamas free all the way to Trump Tower American control. So where exactly the dart lands at the end of the day, I can't tell you. Either way, I hope it lands soon so the dying can stop. They deserve to know something other than death, don't they?